Hi, my name's Caroline Beckett. I'm Vicar of Brightlingsea, and I have just slid onto my sofa sideways after what's been actually quite a manic day.
And my name's Andy Griffiths. I coordinate training for the Diocese of Chelmsford. Also a day with enough stuff in it, if I'm honest. And together,
Together,
we
we
are
are
at a
at a
distance
distance
rethinking
rethinking
Christian leadership.
Christian leadership.
We really want people to send us questions. They can send them to me at randomlyandy@live.com.
Or to me at revcarolinebeckett@gmail.com. Last time we ran out of time before we finished answering some of your questions.
So here's
Here's the one.
Okay, here's the one we never answered. What does the iron rule mean in your lives? Caroline, could I ask you to remind us of the iron rule? I think we spoke about it right back in episode 3, and talk about how it changes your life.
So the basis of the iron rule is don't do for others what they can do for themselves. So it is about power, it's about relationships, and it is about not going in and doing unto, but building power with and doing things with. And I can think of a couple of examples of just from the last couple of weeks. So the first one is a project that I'm involved with called Dig for Victory, somewhat ironically titled because of the early references during COVID-19 to the sort of embattled wartime spirit. So we tapped a little bit into that. And basically the project focuses on involving low-income families in growing their own food. Now, there were a number of reasons behind this. One reason was because a lot of people were quite sad that their children were not going to have the experience of growing, because normally that would happen in the summer term in primary school, and it wasn't happening. And obviously they didn't have the resources to do it at home because people bought up all the gardening supplies really early on, and those who had to wait for their paycheck or their benefit check or what have you missed the boat and couldn't afford to buy online and were going to miss out. There were also some issues around mental health and mental well-being for young people, and also around homeschooling and so forth, and family activities. And also a lot of families just weren't getting out. They didn't really have a reason to go outdoors, particularly if they didn't have much of a garden and couldn't really go out on a walk or for exercise if they were shielding. So looking at all those problems and issues and listening to various people talking about these things, food bank clients and others, we thought, well, what's a way that we can encourage people who are already on the verge of food poverty or already there, so we can give them something positive that they can do for themselves, and just give them just enough to get them started. Because a lot of the time what was going on was all these mutual aid groups and mutual aid societies. Well, the mutual bit is fine if you've got something to offer, but what if you haven't? If you haven't, then your participation in those groups is quite difficult, and it can be quite a bruising and demoralizing experience. And you have to be so careful not to ask for too much and not to be seen to be always wanting things and not giving. And it's such a horrible balance to keep if you're in a low income situation. So by enabling people to grow their own food, we're also equipping them with the means to provide something for others and to be able to live generously. And we often say at Food Bank that the first casualty of poverty is choice, because once you lose your income, you get things given to you and you're supposed to be grateful. And you get told how you ought to spend the little that's given to you because you're poor, so you have to make wise choices. So, you can't buy a chocolate bar if you're having a really rubbish day, because you've got to buy something worthy like pasta or beans or something like that. And people kind of start to police your behaviour because they need you to be worthy of the charity that they are doing unto you. And that's not at all the model that we like to work with. So we like to work with the model of giving people just enough to get them out of a sticky situation that could happen to any of us. And we say, any of us is only 3 months away from a food parcel, because most of us don't have massive savings and rely on our paycheck and so forth. And so it was really just about saying, let's give you the means to transform the situation that you're in, to do something really positive, to get outside. So the dig has 3 versions. It has a version for people who've got soil. It has a version for people who've got land, but actually no soil to grow anything in. So it's containers and compost. And then it has a version for people who don't even have any outside space, who can grow indoors using things like hydroponics or sort of window ledge pots and things like that. And we've got 14 families so far, and a further 20 packages to go out. So that's happening this coming weekend. And so far the take up on that's been really positive. So that's a kind of an outside the church, that's 150%. And the other 50% is that my Zoom group, who've been doing the Zoom Sunday services, we are now turning our minds and our hearts and our prayers towards what church will look like when we emerge from lockdown. We know now that the 4th of July is going to be a sort of watershed moment when we can start to reoccupy our buildings. But we're now thinking together collectively on an equal footing on what we want that to look like, and what we want to take up again, and what we want to create that's new, and what perhaps we might want to just leave and move on from. So that is sort of how that iron rule is working. I'm not going to tell them what the church should look like post lockdown, because it's something that we're going to discover together. And there is a huge amount of collective wisdom in my congregation. So I'm fascinated to see what shape things are going to take.
Yeah, and you were saying one of the things you're doing in the meanwhile is creating a bit of a pilgrimage as people queue up to go into the church for private prayer. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
So we basically took the things that were necessary that people were going to have to do. We were going to have a socially distanced queue. We were going to have only 10 in at a time with socially distanced chairs. People were going to have to wash their hands on entry. The only thing that they were going to physically be able to do in the building or touch is to light a candle. And so going from that, we thought, well, that's, if we do it as you can only do this and you can't do that, that's going to be a very negative experience. So we thought, how can we make that into a pilgrimage? How can we make liturgy around these things? How can we make these things meaningful for people who are coming in and make it more of a journey? So myself and another member of the congregation who's very creative sat down and bashed this out together and came up with the idea of a pilgrimage queue. So we had done this a little bit before. We had chalked messages and pictures on the side of the church for the pharmacy queue, which snakes past the front of the church on its way to Boots Pharmacy. And so we've been chalking messages of hope and pictures of the Easter story and so forth. So what we did this time was we took some of the stages of grief. So we had numbness, and we had confusion and questioning, and we had anger, and we had sorrow, and we had despair and giving up. And we had acceptance, and we had the beginnings of hope, and we had joy. And so the idea is it's a journey that will, people will resonate with different bits as they go through. And then we looked at the symbolism of washing hands. So when people wash their hands with the hand gel, some Bible verses and some thoughts and ideas around that. And when they're lighting the candles, some Bible verses and thoughts around light. And the last thing that we did, which was the idea of Judith Gibbons, who's my wonderful PCC secretary and been on lots of pilgrimages, and we have a pile of stones from which people can choose one, and they carry it along the stations, and then at the end they place it on the pillar just before they go in the door of the church to form a cairn, so that over time the cairn will build up, and then they wash their hands. So it was something that became a journey and a prayer experience, but grew out of the things that we were told we must do. And it was quite nice to slightly subversively reshape them and put meaning into them. And it enables people to process themselves. And again, it's back to this iron rule. It's giving people just enough, not telling them how to feel, not telling them how to journey, not telling them, oh, you should be here, or here are some self-help books to help you get out of your despair or what have you, but actually to sit with those questions and to find their own way through and their own way out. And we're there, and the offer is there, and it's there in black and white on the walls as well. If you'd like us to pray with you, we will. But we wanted to give people the tools for the journey and enable them to make their own journey.
I love that. I love that. And for me, answering that question that we didn't ask last time about what the iron rule means in our lives, But for me, it's about spotting triangles all over the place and trying to turn them into tables.
Now, you're going to have to explain that one.
Okay, so I look at the church and I look at society and I see people having power over others. And sometimes the majority have power over the minority in a drama triangle. We talked about that back in episode 14. And sometimes it's more like a pyramid with one person or an elite having power over everyone else. You even find that in Zoom meetings where one person's using their position or their charisma or the force of their personality or indeed a mute button, and they're holding other people down.
Well, you sometimes do find it in churches where the idea is that the person at the top or the centre is the vicar and everyone else is just their helpers. And then you find the pyramids replicated in other places in the church. So you've got the children's worker at the top in the children's work and everyone else in that ministry is just their helper. And maybe you've got the music director at the top of the music pyramid and all the other musicians or choir members or band members just have to help the music director achieve their vision. And I'm guessing that probably people listening to this are nodding along.
Yes, exactly. And community organising is not about creating a new community organising triangle where the community organiser can be at the top and the centre. It's all about enabling other people to shine. It's about power with, not power over. And that's what I mean by saying it's all about tables, not triangles.
Now, usually I bring a poem, but this time you've brought one though, Andy. Is that right?
Well, it's a piece of poetic writing rather than a poem. It's not by me, it's by Paul Bayes, the Bishop of Liverpool. Here it goes. The table is simple, but it's well made, because the man who made it was a carpenter. It has many uses. A table for meeting, talking around, thumping, signing treaties, debating, arguing, voting, but mostly a table for eating. You can't sit alone at this table. You can't buy a meal here or a ticket here. Everything is freely given. You can sit here with people you don't know and be bound together. A poor man feeds you in a way that means you never go hungry again.
It's a table we want to sit at. Which brings us to our subject for today, which is the fifth stage of community organising. And we call this ensuring everyone gets a place at the table. That's about getting a place at the negotiating table with the state or big business. And we'll talk about that in our next episode. God wants to throw down the mighty from their thrones and lift up the humble and meek. And if God does that, then we'll all end up on a level, eye to eye, face to face, and for the moment, Zoom to Zoom.
And it's also about building flat teams in our institutions. You'll remember, I'm sure, that broad-based community organising is one of the things that Barack Obama was talking about when we looked at what community organising was right back in episode 1. It's about building flat teams in our churches, in our case, that break down the hierarchies and find new ways to work that are more fully about power with instead of power over. We'll talk about that in episode 18.
But because we're Christians, we can't hear the word table without also thinking about the table of God, the holy table or the altar or whatever you want to call it. It's part of the task of Christian leadership to extend an invitation to the banquet of God, which is prefigured in the Eucharist. And in episode 19, we'll talk about that. We'll speak about an approach to evangelism that fits with community organising and an approach to inclusion that makes sure we don't put obstacles in people's way. I have to admit, though, I have a concern.
Go on.
Well, it kind of sounds like the three things in this final stage, negotiating, flat teams, and inviting people to Eucharist, are just three random things that are only connected by the use of metaphor table. But that can't be right, can it?
And I completely see why you asked that. Caroline, I promise the metaphor happens to be convenient, but there is more to this connection than the metaphor of tables. The point is, the final stage of community organizing is not about gaining anything for the community organizer. It's not about power over. Community organizers try to get other people to the places they need to be, whether that's getting them into the room where it happens when decisions are made, or getting them appropriate power within their institutions, or getting them into the best place they possibly can be, which we believe is adoption as children of a loving God through Jesus.
So instead of calling the fifth stage ensuring everyone gets a place at the table, we could have called it ensuring everyone is in the best possible position in relation to the state, business, the church, and God, without the Christian leader exercising power over anyone.
Exactly, but it is only a small website.
So we'll cover negotiation next time. Meanwhile, Andy, you've been telling us about some community organising through a Facebook group. How's that going?
So on Monday, the governing party of the City Council had a special meeting to discuss what we're doing.
Whoa, hang on a minute. A few episodes ago, you just had 7 people and a new Facebook group.
Yeah, well, the group grew to 4,500 and we did lots of fun activities and songs and jokes and helping each other find formula and coordinating mutual aid groups.
So I guess that was the organising stage.
Exactly. Then there was the listening stage as we told stories. On Easter Monday, I posted the question, "Why are you crying?" And 40 people poured their hearts out in the comments and said what was making them weep.
After Jesus asked, "What are you crying?" he asked, "What are you looking for?"
Yeah, yes, and so did we. I asked what pledges people would like to make as we moved to a new stage of lockdown and restoration. And I got about 50 suggestions, and then in a kind of World Cup group stage style of democracy, we narrowed it down to 7 pledges. Some of the pledges are individual, like shopping locally and smiling more. And some require collective action, like sorting out the parking at Broomfield Hospital and connecting communities and putting in more cycle lanes.
I've been visiting the Facebook group, so I saw the next stage. For each of the pledges, you got people to tell their stories in that fairly public forum, knowing that decision makers were watching.
That's right. The final stage isn't me and my fellow admins becoming powerful. It's enabling the members of the group to have a seat at the table.
And so the mayor and the governing party leader and others are taking notice and pledging to do something about the issues your members have democratically identified as significant.
Yeah, that's right. It's early days because when you negotiate, as we'll be saying next week, you're not looking to solve everything at the first meeting. But over time, a relationship builds that gets things done. Thank you for listening. We've been at a distance,
Rethinking
rethinking Christian
Christian
leadership.
leadership.